Welcome, everyone. My name is Ken Spiro. I am the president and founder of School Sims, and on behalf of the School Sims team, we are delighted to have you on this, join us for this panel webinar. And we are joined by a wonderful panel of folks who will be introducing over the course of the conversation. Dr. Liz Azukas will be joining us, leading the panel from East Stroudsburg University of Pennsylvania. And we have Sarah Dexter from University of Virginia, Mike Johannick from University of Pennsylvania, Allison Newman from Delaware Valley High School, Trent Grunmeyer from Buena Vista University, and Philip Caldwell from Eastern Michigan. All of them come with a wealth of experience and expertise, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to have it shared in the context of, obviously, simulation. That's why we're here. But beyond just for training. So really to look at this modality and the power that it provides, that's kind of the focus of what we wanted to address. But by way of introduction, first of all, so Liz, if we can go to the next slide. First, I do want to say that please, throughout this process, this is designed to be a conversation. Obviously, we'll be having a conversation amongst the panelists, but we're very interested in your thoughts, your questions, etc. So please feel free to post in chat. There will be opportunity for Q&A towards the end where we can just open the mic and have at it. But I've been doing simulations for a long time, and I'm going to define what I mean by simulations because I'm sure that many of you have dealt with, given that there's no taxonomy, you've done things that you call simulations. It might be different, and therefore we'll define so that we can be on the same page. But really, the operating premise behind simulation is that experience is the best teacher, right? We know that. We know that from infancy. The next slide, Liz. We also know that simulations approximate experience, right? You wouldn't put a pilot in a plane. You wouldn't put a doctor or a nurse in a patient suite. We certainly wouldn't send any of our military out into the field without hours of simulation, right? You want to prepare them with the ability to respond because responding requires critical thinking, requires the ability to exercise judgment. And that is developed through experience. And so the opportunity to capture, to deploy experience in a scalable way is something that's critical, and something that we are certainly focused on doing in the education space. On the next slide, Liz. So for us, simulations are browser-based so that they can be scalable. And really, it's a kind of choose-your-own-adventure type experience where teachers or administrators are going to be challenged in an education context to make decisions, to exercise judgment, and have to make determinations of what to do in complex situations where there's no right answer because they're contextual issues. But also to have the opportunity to deal with the consequences because there's always blowback. And we want you not to be able, not just have the opportunity to think, but also to build resilience because things are going to go badly. I mean, you pretty much know that, right? Somebody's not going to like what you did. And so you got to be prepared. You got to have thick enough skin in order to navigate that. And the only way to really thicken your skin and to practice judgment in a safe space is going to be simulation. And so that's what this modality provides for. And on the next slide, just the idea of scalability, that when we are talking about experience, that it can be done wherever it's needed. It can be done synchronously in class or virtually. It can be done asynchronously, etc. So in order to be able to provide impactful, meaningful experiences, that's the role of this form of simulation and why it can have great impact from a development perspective, whether you're in a district and doing PD or professional learning, or in a university context in which you are blending these with curricular components. But one of the things we really wanted to examine in this context is what are the benefits of thinking about, we distinguish between how we learn from instruction versus how we learn from experience, right? Instruction is all about the right way to do it. It's about best practices. It's about the stuff we need to know. That isn't necessarily intuitive, right? So it needs to be taught, and that's great. But the thing about experience is it's not about best. It's not about doing it right. Our best learning opportunities come from making mistakes, come from failing. And so whereas you wouldn't design instruction with that in mind, we have to design experience with that in mind, right? So those are two different learning models at play. And the question is when we start focusing on experience as a separate objective, it starts to open up all kinds of opportunities. When we design a simulation, one of the first questions we ask is, what experience do you want your students to have? Because that will drive what ultimately gets developed. But the beauty of this modality is that when you think about this idea of what experience do I need my participants to have or my target audience to have, now it opens up itself beyond this idea of just development, right? The opportunity now becomes, this is a tool that I can use for engagement. I can get whoever it is I'm working with to be engaged in the moment in a contextual exercise that can develop all kinds of things. And really, it's up to your imagination, right? We know what we know, and okay, but once you put this tool into other people's hands, all of a sudden the opportunity to say, huh, well, what if? Whether it comes to ideas of selection, whether it comes to thinking backwards to CTE opportunities and engaging students with what may be possible in the future, or using them for assessment, or using them for interactive exercises between stakeholder groups, all of a sudden, all these possibilities can harness from the same tool. And that really was the goal of providing some insight in this, is because simulations can be used for so many things because of its power of engagement, because of its immersing the student into something where they can think, where they're encouraged to think and they even want to. That's where the power can be in terms of what you can do with this when you're trying to address your particular objectives. So with that in mind, I will stop talking because most importantly, you came here to hear from our panelists. I wanted to introduce Liz Azukas, who is currently an associate professor at East Stroudsburg University of Pennsylvania in the Department of Professional Secondary Education, also instructional design technology. She's a former K-12 district administrator, and she's always been interested in how innovation related to games, simulations, and technology can enhance learners' experiences. And it's been delightful working with her because actually the prompt for this webinar came from her because of all the ways that she has found applications for this modality in the other things that she's doing. And with that, Liz, please take it away.
Thank you, Ken. Welcome, everyone. I am currently working on a Pennsylvania preparation to practice grant, which prompted a lot of this thinking. The original call for the grant talked about a focus on the principal internship, and we wanted to look at how we could enhance our principal internship experiences by applying simulations. But then when you got into filling out the paperwork for the grant, it asked about all kinds of other things. And so we started to really think about how we could use simulations across the continuum of our entire principal preparation program, including recruitment, coursework, internship, our principal competency portfolio, and our own program evaluation. We also partnered with the school district to look at how simulations could be used for principal induction and principal professional development. The recruitment led us into thinking about the teacher pipeline, because if we don't have a strong teacher pipeline, that makes principal recruitment very challenging. And so we started doing some work around teacher recruitment with the simulations. And one of our speakers is going to talk a little bit more about that. But this really prompted me to be thinking about creative ways of maximizing the potential, the impact, and the investment of the simulations. And I'm going to talk specifically about our recruitment effort. We put together a professional development that we opened up to teachers in all of our neighboring districts. The focus was decision making. So it was called Teacher Leadership Dynamic Decision Making. And we provided 3 hours of Act 48 credits for participants. And we had all of our principal contacts, our graduates, tap folks on the shoulder that they thought exhibited some teacher leadership potential to invite them. And we sent it out to all of our teacher graduates who are now teacher leaders out in the field to invite them to come and talk a little bit about leadership in the context of their teaching. I brought in a bunch of our current students and our graduates, many of whom are sitting administrators in local districts, to help facilitate this. And they came in and we kicked it off with each of them sharing a little bit about what they like about their roles as leaders in the districts. And then we talked a little bit about some decision-making frameworks. And then we let our participants choose between 3 different simulations. We use cultural competency, difficult conversations with a novice teacher, both of which are principal level simulations. And then we use supporting student identities, which is a teacher leadership simulation. And our participants chose which they were most interested in, went to that group, and my expert facilitators led them collaboratively through these simulations. And as I walked around, people were highly engaged, having very deep and meaningful conversations about all of these topics, which linked very nicely to our new standards alignment, because we're in the process of aligning new ethics standards and new competencies for culturally responsive and sustaining education in the state of Pennsylvania. And so these simulations overlapped very nicely with those, and those were embedded in the conversations that the participants were having. We then held a debriefing where we just had people think about, talk about their experiences with the simulations, think about how the decision-making framework helped them or didn't help them in making these various decisions in the course of the simulations, and what they thought they learned about leadership. And we did not build this as a marketing event for the university. It really was a professional development, but it got a lot of people interested about leadership. And we've had some people apply to the program and inquire about applying to the program. And I thought it was just a really nice way of building community with our local districts. So it was a wonderful experience, and one that I think we will definitely do again. And I'm now going to turn things over to Allison Newman, who was actually one of our facilitators at the Professional Development Day and is one of our graduates. So Allison.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to be sharing information about the simulations. I am fortunate enough, I work at a high school. I am a CTE, which is a career technical education literacy coach, along with other hats that I wear here in the building. And I work in one of our programs. We have an early childhood education program with 3 levels. We have sophomores on level 1, we have juniors level 2, and seniors level 3. And I work with them weekly. So Liz and I collaborated, and we decided to facilitate the simulations with the students. And what a response we had to see these high school students discuss and debate and go through these cultural diversity simulations and challenging parent simulations and ethical decision-making simulations, things that they don't necessarily think of when they're in high school. So, for example, in their CTE training, they're learning about lesson plans and state standards and safety and how to write curriculum and things of that nature, where these ethical and cultural and mental health issues are not always things that they're discussing in their lessons. So by facilitating them together, it's a cause for students to really open up, share their opinions, share their ideas, share their backgrounds, and make them think on the spot. It's exciting because in the simulation, when it begins, each simulation says, just as in real life, you cannot go back. So you can't change your answers, which oftentimes, we think, well, should I have said that? Should I have chosen a different way? And it's very interesting to see the kids engage in these conversations. So we've been using it for that, and they look forward to me coming in every week. They're like, what are we doing this week? They'll stop me in the hall and say, do you have it selected yet? So we've been having a wonderful experience with that. We're also using it. We have an aspiring educator pathway project that is student leaders, like kids who are planning on becoming teachers in the future. So we took them, a big group of them, down to the college with Liz at East Stroudsburg University a few weeks ago. They were able to sit in on simulations with students from other surrounding districts and have the same experience. So using those for our after school aspiring educator programs, we have a lot of clubs that we're using that for as well. We're in the process of adding these for our Act 80 days for professional development for our teachers. I'm planning on facilitating one with some of the teachers. Someone from our school board joined us at the AEPP day down at East Stroudsburg, and she isn't interested in using it for even our teacher induction program. So we have a lot of things in the works. It's blossomed into this wonderful opportunity at so many levels. So we're using it for our high school students, our young, new novice teachers, and with induction, hopefully, our current teachers for Act 80 and professional development, and possibly for our current administration as well. So across the board, this works at all different levels. So it's been a great experience.
Thank you, Allison. I'll now turn things over to Sarah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to tell you about how we use the school sims as what I'll call an object, an activity that creates a something, a virtual something, literally in a double meaning, that people can talk about. So the virtual thing is an experience, right? But it provides a commonality for exchange and deliberation, and something for them to have a shared experience around. Our use of it was during what we call an assessment day, when we are bringing together potential admits for a cohort for our master's program. And these students are aspiring to be admitted into the program in a district program partnership. And so this isn't an assessment per se. We have other things that we do have them do and give them points to, on their performance. This is the kickoff event to get people relaxed, talking, and starting to think about, what am I getting myself into? A prospective administrator might think they want to be an administrator. They might believe that they understand what it is, but I think probably everyone on this call recognizes that some things you just don't know until you start doing them. And so this is our way of giving them a something to do to try to help them understand what are they aspiring to become by entering into our master's program. So we use the sim difficult conversations, the dress code one. You might have seen it. For a long time, it was available, maybe it still is, as a demo, a free demo. That was an appealing aspect of using this title, but it also gave people taking a different perspective other than their own as a teacher, and having to sit in that hot seat and make some choices about what to do. And then somebody's not happy. And then, oh, now there's another thing that happened. And I literally remember hearing some participants say, wow, I never thought about it that way. And that was exactly the point that we were making, is that you are going to be thinking about things from a different perspective as you learn to become a school leader. And let's give you a taste of what that looks like. And I just threw on this slide a few of the directions that we gave people. We had them do it in small groups. that they were going to be in those small groups for some of the other kinds of activities that we were using as part of the assessment day. And this broke the ice and got them working somewhat together and comparing ideas. And it's just, I find these a really great tool for getting people to have to decide something and then compare thoughts about it. And they are always surprised to hear that other people think differently. And we all know people do think differently, right? But sometimes it can be surprising when you say, you would choose that one. Why would you choose that choice? And so we made kind of some rules that you can see up here about you've got to come to consensus, discuss it enough. And, then if you already quickly came to consensus, I want you to also think about why are those other choices not what you would do? And then, some debriefing. And the debriefing after the experience is, to me, an incredibly important part because it gets them to think about what did they just have as an experience? How does it tie to things that they know? And what would they do differently next time? And that's part of Kolb's experiential learning cycle that we use very consistently to help us think about what's the full cycle of activities that we want to surround this with. The pedagogy surrounding the sim, to me, is very important. So that's just yet another example of the creative ideas that you're going to hear on this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, at this point, I'll turn things over to Trent.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Excited and learning a few things myself when it comes to applications here, and share a few other points here as well. It's been said already about the training, and at Buena Vista, we are excited to kick off a new program leveraging the simulations throughout every single course for aspiring principals. So I've actually learned firsthand through a study, actually multiple studies we've published on the benefits that everybody's outlined today. And I would just add, as you see some of my students there working, I'd add the other part where we have to have conversations with students about, well, I know that's not the right answer or the best answer, but what would you do if that wasn't an option? Or what if one of your teachers did this? How would you defend them or not defend them as an aspiring principal or athletic director, or curriculum director? So there's value in some of the times not the right choices or not the right answers as well when it comes to training school leaders. But I'm going to hit on a couple other things today in regard to the Sims that I've used for multiple years. If you'll click the next slide, I'll show you some pictures firsthand of using the simulations for hiring. And I'll give you two examples. I do some hiring around the Midwest for principals and superintendents. And in some very large districts, we've actually had the school board in the graphic on the left there. We've had them do the first week on the job. We actually had to do the students in crisis. And the point on actually walking that principal or superintendent through a simulation in front of a hiring team was for them to see and talk through the decision-making of that particular or potential leader in their district, and for the board or hiring team to have to kind of negotiate, well, how would we want someone to act on behalf of the district or the building? And I will tell you, there was real power in that experience as part of the hiring process. So that was very valuable, and maybe something you hadn't thought about. The one caution to that I would tell you on this call is timing. Interviews tend to be very succinct and to the hour, and not much extra time in between. And with the simulations, depending on the choose your own adventure, one might go longer than the other. So you do have to budget for that variable a little bit. In regard to hiring as well, I'm very proud of the simulation that Ken and I collaborated on, and that's the bias in hiring simulation. That's one of the newer ones we did because it's such a hard thing to teach, and it's such a hard thing for people to see. And so we created that simulation for board members, for administrators, for others that can see, witness, identify, and then hopefully build their capacity to address bias in the hiring process. So that's a valuable one that I think could also be beneficial in the hiring process. And then lastly, I would mention another application of the Sims here on the next slide, which is around something new we did last year, where we had a school board and administrative team go through the board relations simulation. That was the one we used. And it was to try to get the administrative team and the board maybe more aligned or more on the same page about how they collectively would respond and handle difficult situations. And I thought that school board relation sim was perfect because it was a board member's child that was in trouble. And I will just tell you, we laughed. There was disagreement, but it was a super valuable simulation to get the, I should back up and say to safely, right? It wasn't an actual situation. It was a hypothetical situation we could walk through between the admin team and the board with the school district. And this summer, we're going back to do another one. So I think it was a success, and it was a unique way we were able to leverage the sim to get a board and a admin team more on the same page. So just a couple examples, happy to follow up, but I believe firsthand in the power of these simulations and multiple different avenues you're hearing today.
Okay, great. I bet that was really interesting.
Yes.
Would have liked to have been a fly on the wall there. Thanks, Trent. I'll turn things over now to Philip.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me participate. So I'm at Eastern Michigan University in our Leadership and Counseling program. We have a K-12 leadership and doc program. Our focus is on traditional folks who want to be building level administrators, central office administrators, and we have a master's program. So the way that we have piloted SIMS, the usage of SIMS in our program over the last year are basically as performance assessments. And so we have 3 cycles of knowledge that we are trying to impart on the student experience as graduate students. So if you don't remember anything else I say, we're using SIMS as a part of the learning experience. And this is kind of where Ken and I gravitated to. So we have funds of knowledge, problems of practice, and theories of change. And so in those performance assessments, we're looking for candidates to complete various simulations at key points within the program. So what you see up on the screen, after the first set of courses, they take a simulation to kind of gauge and have them demonstrate their knowledge, skill, and disposition in terms of educational leadership. And then the second part of that is we have all the student candidates write a written reflection that they submit on their experience with the SIM. So this is not a right or wrong type of answer. We score with a particular rubric. That rubric is aligned with NELP standards that we score as faculty. And then for us, the benefit is that we're actually using the simulations as a part of our assessment portfolio that we are submitting to CAPE for accreditation. And so the student reflections are, from a raw data standpoint, reviewed. This past year, in terms of our first cycle, we did 3 iterative coding cycles to identify themes, theories, beliefs, values from students. And again, not a right or wrong, but trying to indicate or trying to better understand what knowledge, disposition, and skills are being conveyed from our courses to the students through that experience, and identify gaps as a faculty where we might want to strengthen content, strengthen experience that they have in the courses and those kind of things. Am I supposed to change the slide? I'm sorry.
Oh, you can do it for you.
Thank you. The bottom there got cut off, and I apologize. But again, there are 3 clusters of content that we're trying to impart. So one is really that entry point. So the first 2 classes. So we use the simulation that involves a playground incident. I think, Ken, we're using 6 or 7 simulations across the entirety of the program. So we're using quite a portfolio. In the second series of assessments, we're using the SIM where they have to require the leader to make a plan on a school-wide set of instructional interventions using federal funding. And the one that's cut off there is really around school-based funding. And that's an important SIM because most folks who go into leadership think that they get to run into a school and do all these budgetary changes. And what I try to explain to folks is when you start a leadership role, you are inheriting a used automobile. And the best you can do is kick the tires, change the windshield wipers and make sure that your windows go up and down and get an oil change. You don't get a new car. You don't get to go and change a lot of things. And so helping them to understand that in the simulation is really important. I'll stop there. I think that's kind of in a nutshell, what we do with the simulations. Thank you.
Right, great, thank you. And Michael.
Hello there. Hello there, everybody. Thank you for being here. Are you able to hear me, Liz?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And Philip, I love that example of the used car. I think I will steal it. I will make attribution, but I love that example of the used car and getting the windows to roll up. So I just want to share briefly. First of all, thank you to the other panelists, because I've been busily jotting down the ideas from these other uses. We've been involved in the SimWorks over the years. Our program, the program I direct now, is a doctoral program for experienced school leaders. And so we bring in a cohort, one each year. And we also stay in touch with folks over the following years as alumni through initiatives and such. And in the next slide, if I could, what we really focus so much of our work on is a way that we, and again, I don't think this is any rocket science, and I think others are it sounds similar to some of the other themes and some of the other presentations. When we think about the leadership that we're developing, again, these are generally folks who are out there in the world for 15, 20 years before they come to us, is to really think about the ways in which we make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And we break it down into this notion so that we can get a little bit more concrete about how we might develop it. So how is it that folks actually name and frame issues when they come up? What are they able to draw upon conceptually in order to be able to deal with that set of issues and set of data and cues that are coming their way? They act upon it and interact with it in a way that either gains more information or doesn't. And then they have that process of debriefing. And it was good to see some of the explicit debriefing materials that already were just presented. So that cycle repeats, right, hundreds and hundreds of times a day. And it seems to us that the Sims gives us a chance of some visibility into it. So in the next slide, and I thought it might be easier just to do these by graphical pieces, is to talk about some of the ways in which we've tried to integrate the use of Sims in different aspects of the program. Starting with our admission process, we invite everyone who applies to the program to an interview process that is coordinated by, facilitated by our alumni. And one of the aspects of that process is a group simulation process. So they go through one of these Sims and carry on a discussion with it. So it has gives us a chance to have a view into their own thinking and their own mode of reacting into an actual leadership context. We've also started a few years ago something called the PELS, or the Penn Educational Leadership Simulations Program. It's headed up by two of our alumni, Julie King and Antonio Vance. And the effort here is to work with current students and alumni to help them understand how to develop simulations. We have often found that one of the great benefits that folks tell us about as they've worked on simulations is that not just is the practice is useful in doing the sim, but helping to build Sims also has a benefit, because they start to think about the situations that they face day in and day out and then wonder, if I had to put 3 or 4 multiple choices here in the situation I just faced, what would those have been? And so there's a way to kind of break out our thinking a little bit further that way. So that's another initiative and a place where we use it. Below that, you may see the jump around a little bit here, repositioning educational leadership. We also, as others have done, incorporate it within the coursework that we have. This is a leadership seminar that we run for first-year students. And in part to talk about the issue of what is my capacity to make judgment calls in the moment, in those situations in which I need to react quickly, the situated judgment calls, and what are the things that affect it, and how do we give ourselves practice time for that. We also think there's a great deal opportunity here for research, and we've begun as a doc program to incorporate this in multiple ways. We saw some of the research already being carried out by some of the panelists here. The one on the bottom left here, Relay, which is this network that we have across the Americas. And we're carrying out right now a research project across 4 countries where we're going to give the same simulation to novice and experienced urban elementary school principals. to try to find out what are those patterns? What does change? Does something change when you come from novice to a veteran or not? How do they correlate to other attributes of leadership, such as your levels of empathy or sense of self-efficacy and so forth? So that's another opportunity. Again, it gives us a window into the way we think, that kind of graphic, if you will, of how we think about things behind our decision-making. And in that final right corner, you'll see the dissertation in progress sign. I didn't know a good image to have for a dissertation. But it was essentially, we have some of our students now who are beginning to see Sims as useful data collection. A gentleman right now looking at novice versus veteran independent school heads. We had another who used simulations to try to look at a concept he calls organizational improvisation. What is the capacity of improvisation that leaders demonstrate, and to put them in simulated situations in order to try to understand that. All of which sort of comes around the full circle here to the judgment project up in the top right there, which is something that we just launched last fall, which is to say that not only is this an issue that we have in educational leadership, but there's a lot we can learn if we look at the simulations across different professions. So we brought together medicine, nursing, business, policing, teacher education, and leadership formation to try to understand what is the capacity that we think we're trying to develop. Can we gauge it clearly enough through things like simulations so that we can intentionally develop it? So I think these are, at least from admissions through various research efforts, some of the work that we're trying to do to tap the experiential design in this work through simulations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Lots of really interesting things going on. I think we're all learning here too, how we might use things in different ways. I have a couple of questions, and then I think we can turn things over to our audience for questions. I heard a lot of people talking about this idea of making thinking visible in a lot of different contexts. And I'm curious as to how you're capturing that or measuring that, or using specific tools of analysis. I was wondering if some of you could speak about that a little bit.
Well, happy to jump in, and then hear for others. I mean, there are two ways right now that we are trying to capture information, principally. Well, three actually. So one is two, at least during the simulation. So providing people simulations, and we can look at, for instance, the pattern of choices that people make. And we can look at that relative to who it is that's participating, and so characteristics about them. The second is to interrupt the simulation experience with places, either through text box or through talk aloud kind of protocols, to ask them, so in that first scenario, what stood out to you? What did you notice as an initial aspect of people's thinking? And then later on in the simulation, why did you make that choice? Could you just talk us through your reasoning a little bit, so that we can get both the noticing aspects of people's judgment calls as well as their interpretive capacities. And then, of course, we do some surveying questions up front to try to understand what might correlate to these patterns that we're seeing in the patterns of choices and in the explanations of their reasoning. So I hope that gets at your question.
Thanks. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Could you restate the question one more time, Liz?
Sure. I was just saying that a lot of people are talking about this idea of making thinking visible, specifically in light of certain types of skills, relational skills, or Sarah mentioned specifically being able to listen to the perspectives of others and perhaps come to consensus. And I was wondering how people are capturing that or evaluating that as a part of that process.
I can add that we recently did some surveying of our graduates, and we just treated it as a perceptual issue and asked them what kinds of outcomes did participating with school sims, as well as a couple other sim types that we use in our program, how did it help them deepen their understanding of content knowledge, understand the perspectives of others, and they use a Likert scale to rate it. So we are just embarking upon thinking our way through how do we get at treating these as more of a formative assessment activity, where there's some benchmark knowledge, like key indicators of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we are looking for ahead of time that these provide evidence for. And of course, that requires a different approach to data collection, and hopefully we're going to come up with something more automated than pure brute force of watching, recording, and coding. So stay tuned to see if we figure that out. But we've used, to make a long answer short, surveys with Likert scales for self-rating.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
I could jump in real quick with the high schoolers. We have done a few one-page reflection papers once we're done, just like a reflection, and then we'll go back. That gives us as the instructor. So I'm the CTE instructor and they actually have their own instructor. And then we kind of debrief and talk about some issues that they were completely, they did not come together on. So that's something that then she uses to drive her instruction. This is something that she needs to address, something that they're struggling with, or something that there's a disproportion of opinions there, and she, will use that information from their reflection pieces, in her lessons to discuss it openly and go, let's say, ethical, moral decisions and teacher guidelines and things like that. Because, in all honesty, these young kids are coming from so many different backgrounds and households, and a lot of our kids right now are those so-called COVID kids, and they have just they have so many different perspectives and ideas, and just with all of the different norms in society right now, it's very important that we find that we bring that out and address it and talk about it, and the reflection papers give us that voice after of the students after we've done a simulation. So that has been so beneficial to us.
Liz, I would add just one other thing for us. So we do a mix of rubric scoring of the Sims, which is all being piloted. So this is all new. And then we did a series of qualitative coding and analysis. The brute force still exists, I guess. But I think important for us, having both data sets allows us to dig a little deeper to understand. So for example, the important aspects of ed leadership in terms of communication, training, stakeholder engagement, timely change, team composition, community relations, those kind of things, which are covered in our coursework, did show up thematically in the student responses, in particular in their reflections. But we also learned about how students think about valuable insight. We gained insights into how they value the decision-making process and the strengths that they bring to the table in terms of what we saw in terms of their decisions in the sim and in their reflection in the sim. So for example, in one of the simulations that was emotionally charged scenario, there was a necessity to facilitate more structure or kind of constructive dialogue. And so we got to see empathetic communication, students validating concerns, and just kind of knowing when there was a lot of deference of authority because these are emerging leaders, right? And so we did see that in their reflections. I think on the extended part, what our program faculty learned from the qualitative and quantitative scoring was that we were able to see students kind of emphasize the things that we think are important in our program in terms of effective communication, equity, focused considerations specifically, and kind of holistic decision-making. And we wanted to also kind of see them demonstrate reflective practices. So again, not a right or wrong answer, but how do they reflect on their own decision-making? Now, instead of the brute force, this is what I'm talking to Ken about, like how do we prototype the things that we've coded, both quantitatively from a rubric standpoint, and then the qualitative to help us kind of retrofit this a little bit more seamlessly. I don't know how that's going, but we'll see what happens in the next year or so.
Great, thank you. I'm curious if people could speak to some of the ways that your learners or your participants have responded to being given these experiential opportunities. I know when I first started talking about using this as a recruitment tool, Sarah had also mentioned, the idea of what are you getting yourself into? And we were doing this with pre-service teachers, and we were doing this with pre-service leaders. And I think there are a few people who thought, are you nuts? Like, you're going to drive them away. But that wasn't our experience at all. I know I can share that, for the most part, I think people found it really engaging. I think people appreciated being asked what they thought about some of these issues, and having the opportunity to engage in the decision-making process, as well as to participate collaboratively with others. And so I think it was very much not what some people expected. I think it really got a lot of people interested in these different roles. And I was wondering if any of you wanted to speak to how your students responded to these experiential opportunities.
Liz, I can address that briefly here.
Sure.
Runner at Buena Vista University. First of all, it might sound, you might not believe this, but whether it's, aspiring principals or veteran principals or, teacher leaders, it seems to me in some of our research that the engagement, the practicality of the actual simulations that are very realistic, the depth of learning, the diverse perspectives that they have to understand and hear firsthand, those actually seem to be pretty consistent. And I think that's just, what a simulation by design and with good facilitation does. With that being said, I also would just compliment School Sims because they continue to add simulations that I think maintain current trends and issues and things, whether it's teacher leadership, or saw one the other day for the first time on parent teacher conferences, which is like, that would have been great to have before a difficult conversation. So, I think they continue to evolve as well to stay practical and to be current and lead to that engagement, discussion, and diverse perspectives. So.
Thank you.
I would just offer maybe humorous. We use it in an admissions process, and one of the things that we find as a challenge is getting people to stop because they just sort of want to hang out. They've just met these people, an hour ago, and they've had this conversation. They really dove in, and they're sharing their practice. And so we often have to find space in the building for them to go so that they can continue their conversation as we go forward.
That's great. I think, Allison, you experienced something similar with the high school students, right? They didn't want to go home.
Correct. So I see them at the end of the day, and we have a 48-minute block, and we are just getting to the end, and the bell rings and they do not leave. They're like, wait, we want to see the end. We want to see, there's a wonderful summary that's printable at the end. So we print the summaries off, and then we use that as a guide to go through each question. And that printable summary has been so helpful because then we'll go step by step on question 1. This was our overall choice. Here are some different ideas of things that we could have chosen. It gives you all of the different choices as well. So it's a reminder of those beginning questions, because when you're engaged in the simulation, sometimes it's hard, it's as if it is real life and you cannot go back. So we're like, wait, why did we pick that? And maybe if we had chosen selection 2 instead of 1, we would have had a better outcome. The beauty of it is we have repeated. We did the parent teacher one, which was shocking to our high school students. They could not believe that a parent would be that mean and that abrupt. And they said they wouldn't know what to say or to do. So we did it one time, and then they asked to do it again, and they chose different answers as a group. And it was wonderful to see the different outcomes. So that's the beauty of this. It's not a one-shot deal. You can go over and do this multiple times. I myself, through Liz's program, my ed leadership, I did them as the admin simulations, and I on my own time did them multiple times, choosing the different answers because I was learning as an administrator, as a leader, and wanted to know what would happen with the different choices. So I can't say enough about them. So thank you.
Thanks, Allison. I don't know if anyone else wanted to speak to that. Does anyone, any of the participants have any questions for the panelists? For a minute. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. While we're waiting to see if anyone does have questions, is there anything else that any of the panelists wanted to add?
I think it's been super cool hearing and learning about how they're being used in different places. I mean, there are ideas that have been shared that I hadn't even imagined or thought of. And this is like so amazing to hear about it, from recruitment to, I mean, it's just phenomenal. And so I'm really excited to see the evolution of this as a resource in the learning experience of students.
One other thing I could add is our CTE, our career tech, we have our big OAC meeting coming up, which is our, where we have to apply for Perkins funding and things. And our early childhood instructors are so excited about this. They want to add this to their curriculum. So they are putting this on our minutes in 2 weeks, so at our big meeting, so that we can get the funding for this and use this in our programs on a continuing basis. So we're very excited to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, I have to say that when I worked with, I led one of the sessions on our aspiring educator pathway project. I led one of our sessions, and I had a lot of Allison students who had been doing work with the Sims in the session. And I've been working with teacher preparation candidates and new teachers in districts for many, many years. And it was really, really exciting to see how much knowledge the high school students had about teaching. And I feel like some of the things that are usually a challenge, sometimes when we talk about things like differentiation or using universal design for learning, we get pushback from students saying, but there are so many, I'll have 125 students. And I had these high school students not only not arguing with me about differentiation, but schooling me in it and telling me, why it's important to meet the needs of students. So it really has, I think, incredible potential to have students come into college with a lot of knowledge and skills. And so that's really exciting. And it's exciting to think about what we can do with that across the whole continuum into ed leadership programs. So I definitely want to thank all of the panelists. It's very interesting to hear how they're being used and very exciting. Ken, I'll turn things back over to you to close us out.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you to all the panelists. It's great. It's for me, I've been doing simulations for 35 years now, and it continues to amaze me how in somebody else's hands, all of a sudden, all new things are possible. And I just think about it's an important thing to note that with respect to simulation, it's not about the sim, it's about what it enables. And so very quickly when using this modality, often the engagement fades. Yeah, it becomes subsumed, if you will, by the engagement between the participants, as a number of the panelists have mentioned. And all of a sudden you get into this discussion that the sim becomes the hub for, but the value, the extrapolation is where the rubber's really meeting the road, because it gets into application. And what the sims do is basically grease the skids so that it gets you into that place in a non-confrontational, engaged way where you can really focus on stuff. So the power of the modality is both for development, but also for the extrapolation. And I don't know tools that are available that enable this range, working from high school students through doc students, and everywhere in between, in terms of it's the same tool, obviously different sims, but it's the same modality that can be used that broadly. And really it is in the subscription model that we have elected to use, means that you have the freedom to be able to use them in the way that best serves the needs of your students. It's not about what we think you should do. It's about what you think your students need, or what your students think they need. And one of the additional applications that we have heard from districts is where in a leadership development or an assistant principal program, there's one district in Georgia that it shared that as part of their leadership pipeline process, they not only have the participants, the assistant principals, do the simulations from a PD perspective, but then they task them with leading a sim with their leadership team, so that they get not only the opportunity to play, but they get the opportunity to practice and demonstrate facilitative leadership by leading. If you teach your leader and you're leading a sim in a PLC, engaging way, or simulating students, where we often in this modality we simulate the role, right? You're a teacher, you're a principal, you're a superintendent. But what happens if we make you a student? And now the goal is either for student or for teacher to realize, to have that perspective of what the student is going through, right? You know what you want to do, but what is the student, how are they processing what it is you're doing with the challenges that are going on in their lives, right? So in terms of when they're dealing with bullying, it doesn't matter how good your lesson plan is. It doesn't matter how good whatever it is you're trying to teach is, right? But how do we then get into that space where we can focus on both at the same time? So it's delightful to have this opportunity to engage with this panel. It's been a growth opportunity for me and for the company, certainly, in terms of hearing these ideas and being able to process them and respond to them in terms of ways that the modality can be benefited from, and obviously to serve the field, because ultimately that's our goal. So we'd be delighted to hear from anybody else, both now or in the future. But I do want to, the offer for being able to engage was put in chat, so please feel free to take advantage of that. And we look forward to connecting with you in future webinars, and certainly in any other development opportunities that may come up. But thank you all for your attendance, and we'll stick around if you have any additional questions. We wish you a good end of year as the school years are coming to a close, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you all. And if anybody has any questions, if those who are still around, if you want to just unmute, you can feel free to go ahead and ask. Well, I will just say thank you all very much. It was delightful, Liz. Thank you very much for leading. And the rest of you, much appreciated your time and your sharing, and obviously your partnership. So here's to more years, and here's to more applications for Sims.
Thank you
Thanks
all.
for having us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for organizing us, Liz. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.